The BBC has suspended all of its phone-in competitions after discovering that fake winners were used on 3 of its big charity events. The broadcaster quiz aired during Children in Need, Comic Relief and Sports Relief broke its editorial guidelines. Well, joining me now from Westminster is Jeremy Hunt, the Shadow Secretary for Culture, Media and Sport. Good evening to you. Were you surprised at all by today's revelations?
Well, I welcome the fact that the BBC Trust's words were so clear and firm about how totally unacceptable this is, and that Mark Thompson, the Director General of the BBC, moved very fast. But I do think this is a very grim night for the BBC. It is the kind of gold standard in British broadcasting, and if the BBC can't run its ship cleanly, then what does that say about all our broadcasters?
Do you think, though, that suspending phone-ins and phone-in related quizzes, that goes some way to addressing the problem, or do you think it runs much deeper than that?
Well, I think it is an interim measure, and I think it's an important signal that the Director General of the BBC is very serious about this. But I think the much more important point is that when we had the scandal of the doctored footage of the Queen last week, we thought it was a one-off mistake by a production company that was supplying the BBC. But it now looks like we've got something much more systemic, and that I think is why it was important that the Director General did what he did. But of course this is just the start of the process of the BBC cleaning up its act.
Do you think the BBC deserves to be defended, or is it an organisation that's past its sell-by date? It simply needs to change its way of operating and its whole ethos?
Well, I think there are lots of very, very good things about the BBC. There's lots of excellent programming that they're responsible for, and I think we have to remember that. But nonetheless, this is a very grim night for the BBC. There's been a serious slip-up, and if we can't trust the BBC, who can we trust? And that's why it's incredibly important that we have not just strong words in press releases from the BBC Trust, but actually we see a real change of behaviour on the part of the producers at the BBC and the people who supply the BBC their programmes to make sure that viewers are happy that this is going to stop.
Do you trust the BBC?
Well, I think that everyone's trust has been a little bit shaken. I don't want to blow this out of proportion, but what I think we've seen here is a very casual attitude amongst producers about not giving the whole picture to viewers, about the occasional small deceptions, but in fact very often we're talking about competitions where people might be pledging money, and it's very, very important that trust is restored. If, for example, we're going to have a successful Comic Relief next year, this year it raised £63 million. It would be a tragedy if people were unwilling to give money in the future because of what's happened.
And if you were Culture Secretary tonight, would you intervene? Do you think it's that serious?
I think if I was Culture Secretary, I would be watching to see how seriously the BBC takes this, and I'd want to know that they are going to translate words into actions. They've made an encouraging start. We've had some much stronger words tonight from the BBC Trust than the kind of language we used to get from the old BBC governors. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we need to see a real change in behaviour before we're going to be able to start trusting the BBC again.
Shadow Secretary for Culture, Media and Sport even, Jeremy Hunt, thank you.
Thank you.
Top story, angst at the auntie. BBC has admitted that 3 of its most famous charity events put fake quiz winners on air, and this, of course, following those scandals over Blue Peter and the wrongly edited footage of the Queen. Roger Graef, the BAFTA award-winning TV producer, joins us now from central London. What is going on at the BBC?
Well, it's easy to generalise too much about this. And it's important to remember that quite large parts of the BBC are still doing what they should always be doing, which is doing public service broadcasting of a kind nobody else will do. And hopefully those programmes at least are not driven entirely by ratings. But what is happening, I think, is a kind of erosion of those values in other parts of the BBC's output, where the competition with, and the fear driven by channels such as yours, but also the competition generally from digital and the online audiences which are younger, and the people that the BBC now is preoccupied with getting, as Channel 4 has been, that means there's a kind of losing sight of, I think, the original purpose of the BBC. And the idea of cheating on telephone calls, of course, has no place whatsoever. I mean, those contests should never have been rigged at all, but they were probably outsourced to a company that had nothing to do with public service broadcasting. So I think the commercial ethos that has taken over, both in terms of competition and in terms of maximising their revenue, is at odds with what they're really there for.
But why have they fallen into that trap? After all, they still get a licence fee. They still get revenue of something close to £3 billion a year to make their programmes. They don't have to justify it in the same way as commercial broadcasters do. Why have they slipped down the slope?
Well, I'm not the Director General, although I was on the long list when Graef got the job. And I certainly wouldn't have conducted this way. I would have lowered my own and other people's salaries. I think the symbolism even of those high salaries infects the way the BBC is managed, because in a sense they see themselves as, indeed they are, titans of broadcasting, but they're not in direct competition only for viewers, because they're providing a service which is of a different kind. They measure their success in ratings terms unnecessarily, in my view. But if you start going in that direction, then cutting corners and just going for ratings makes, you know, the end justifies the means. Well, that's not the case in public service enterprises.
Roger, I mean, some observers point the finger in a way at people like yourself. The outside, the independent production companies, who of course make so many of the BBC's programmes, and perhaps bring a different, maybe a bit more maverick culture, not of the essence of the BBC that I was certainly brought up to understand in the 70s and 80s. Is that a factor?
Well, it is a factor on a number of grounds. First of all, we all are in competition with each other, and we run businesses. I've been running mine for 30 years. I haven't found it necessary to cut corners, and indeed our USP, our unique selling point, is that we don't. And we actually say, look, all the other companies are racing towards the, you know, the center ground of reality shows, and you know, I mean, there's, ironically, one of the best of them is called Faking It, made by RDF, who did The Queen. But they
think it might be a headline tomorrow, don't you?
Well, you know. But anyway, all I'm saying is that was a really brilliant show, but everybody in the audience knew what was going on. That was the point. It was clearly about faking it. What's terrible when it happens like this is that the deal is not obvious to everyone. And in that sense, the cheating on the audience, or in that case the press, by moving a sequence backwards to make an effect, is something that's tempting. I think the word maverick I'm not so happy with. What we are, if you like, is a kind of independence of spirit. We're not careerists. When, you know, most people are not doing it for the money. John Harvey-Jones famously said it's a lifestyle, and we do it because we believe in what we're doing, we enjoy what we're doing, we're curious about the world outside, and we're more interested in taking risks of a kind of journalistic kind than just all that economic kind.
I'm sure viewers will, but there must be a suspicion that this is not just a recent thing. This has gone back a while. It may well have gone back to the Gilligan episode and the confrontation with the government. The Hutton report was another low day for the BBC. There have now been the reports into the left-wing bias in news and current affairs. Then things like Blue Peter and the phone-in shows and the documentary of the Queen, where people clearly misled the public. Now more revelations within the BBC. It appears to be a cultural change, something that has been developing over a period of time. It's not new.
Well, let me say two things. First of all, the great British documentary tradition, which some people will have heard of, you know, John Grierson, people like that, they staged everything. And the BBC grand documentaries in the 60s and 70s, large quantities of those were staged. They would light the scene, they would tell people to walk in and out 3 or 4 times. I mean, in that sense, they were almost feature films with unpaid actors. And so in that sense, the notion of staging isn't new. What's new is the cutting things in order to achieve an effect rather than to tell the essential truth. And in that sense, distorting it to go after the ratings, to go after commercial success in the case of Worldwide and so on, and these phone-ins are obviously due to maximize revenue, that is new, and it's a kind of ruthlessness which I'm very worried about. I see it as a kind of moral, or what I call an ethical virus. People have become ethically colorblind in pursuit of these, you know, short-term, rather numerical, if you like, rather than moral ends, even though the wider purpose of the BBC must remain intact, and does remain intact, and I think it would be unfair to tar the whole BBC with this brush. There is simply a part of it that is, you know, out to win rather than to do what it was originally intended to do.
Indeed. Roger Graef, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.